So starting to paint our shells with watercolor. First off, we want to make sure that our pencil drawing is light enough that once we start painting, we're not going to still be seeing obvious pencil lines. So to lighten your lines, if they happen to be too dark, using this thing called a kneaded eraser, you just press it against your pencil lines and it significantly lightens them without removing them. All right, with watercolor, you pretty much always want to work lightest to darkest, working wet on wet in the beginning, getting base colors down, basically covering all the areas that need color with color before doing any details. So it's just base color first. That's stage one. We then often let the base color stage dry and then start adding more saturated, more detailed paintings on top of that. So at some point in this video I'll cut. But let's just start with the base color. So I'm looking at my shell and I'm trying to assess what a good base color would be. Now, part of the shell is this kind of purpley color and part of the shell is this off-white color. So I'm just going to paint the whole thing an off-white color with some wet on wet color modulation. That's where I start. So first I just am trying to color match that off-white color of the shell. It's kind of a yellowish pinkish tone. So I'm going to start with some yellow, add in some pink, and obviously this is going to be like way too saturated. So I need the color to be lighter as well as less saturated, and those are two different things. So to make it lighter, we add water. To desaturate it, and I'll show you, this just automatically knocked that color way lighter. To desaturate it, you're going to add a color's opposite. So if the color I have mixed right now is an orange, and I look at the color wheel, the opposite of orange is green. I'm just going to add a little bit of green. Don't add too much because we don't want the whole color to turn green. We just want the orange to take a step back and quit being so intense. Alright, so I added a little bit of green again and again and again. That's pretty close. I think I want it to be pushed a little bit more towards the pink versus the orange. So I'm gonna add a little bit more red. Again, once you get close to your color, you want to add just little amounts. If you add big amounts, you really run the risk of just changing the color completely and getting into this really frustrating back and forth. Alright, so the light version of that I'm gonna go with. So again, my plan was just to cover the whole thing in that pinkish light tone, making sure I'm staying inside the shell currently. Alright, so the whole thing is wet, and we've used this base tone because there's no real white on my shell, so I didn't need to save any whites. Now that it's wet, I get to do some cool wet on wet action, mixing in some other underlying tones and colors in there. So I'm noticing that up towards the butt of the shell, it's a bit pinker in general, if you can see it, but it is. And so I'm just gonna mix a newer color that kind of matches that. And while my piece is still wet, I'm just gonna work some of that color in. You can kind of just drop it in and let it spread and move it around to where you want it. So alright, and when you're working wet on wet, the color really feathers, so you're not going to be able to be too precise, but just sort of let the paint do its feathering job, and if you want to move it around a little bit, you can use your brush to kind of direct it. You can also dry off your brush, like if there's too much in an area, dry off your brush and pick up the extra pigment. So I almost want a like very muted purple now for some of these areas. I do want it to be quite light because I'm working on just the lightest colors that exist in my shell right now. So I'm adding in some of that purple tone where I see it. Again, working wet on wet, letting it feather out. Because again, watercolor dries lighter than it looks wet. So this is all going to be a little bit lighter than it is now. And it's just the underpainting that I'm going to keep adding all the saturation and all the detail on top of. So let's see, it's shiny for you. Let's see if we can get a little bit closer look. So I will show you this again when it has dried. And then we'll think about how we want to tackle doing some of the more saturated, more detailed parts. Okay, so a new day, this has dried. Again, just a reminder for watercolor, you kind of have two stages. So you stage one, or part one, you're getting all the underpainting done. So especially getting the lightest colors on whatever you're trying to paint established, figuring out where you need to save your whites, and usually working wet on wet to kind of get that cool feathering effect where you want it. Step two is after it's dried and your base coat is done, is then you get to start working wet on dry. So this is dry, we'll be working wet on top of dry to start getting all those more saturated, darker details. Dang. All right. So this really will be quick, just starting to show you how that wet on dry really kind of amps up the contrast. Because when we were working wet on wet last time, this was like everything was really light and feathering together. So right now I'm just quickly trying to mix that darker part of my shell, the kind of purpley color. All right, again, I'm still working lightest to dark. So I've done the absolute lightest stuff. So now I'm working in the middle tones, and then very last will be the darkest parts of my shell. So this color is still a little lighter than it actually is on the shell, but that's okay because I'm going to be building up those layers. Again, you can only get so dark with watercolor. So sometimes when you need to go darker, what you have to do is lay down the color once, let it dry, lay another layer of that same color on top, and it's like two panes of colored glass on top of each other. It will get darker. But you can only get so dark with watercolor because it's by nature transparent, translucent. So sometimes you just have to do it in 2 or 3 layers to get it really dark. Okay, so I know I need to save the whites in between the colors, right? On this guy, there is light lines running up my shell. And the kind of purplish color sits in between. And it goes all the way to the scalloped edge. And there's little, it's not fully filled in, it's kind of like an irregular color, and I see how it kind of gets lighter as it goes back towards the butt. So I'm just going to create a little lighter section as well for me to kind of do that over by the butt of the shell. Okay, and then the darker color again. Just going carefully and working on each individual row. So once you're working on the details, you really do got to slow down. You're not using a ton of water anymore. You are looking carefully at your shell. Again, think about those medieval artists where they tried to do drawings of dogs or whales without ever having seen the thing. They came out pretty bad. If you have access to a picture or the real thing, look at it. It is the best information you're going to get about how that thing looks. If you guess from your head, you're going to wind up with a dog that kind of looks like a dog, but something not right about it. So always be looking at reference, whether it's the real thing or a picture. And I'm going to stop there because I don't need you to watch me do the whole shell. But you can automatically kind of see how that wet on dry layer is so much brighter, so much more saturated and darker. And again, the only way to save those light colors is to never paint there. So the spots in between the rows of dark purple, I just have to never paint there to keep it that light color.